Hello and welcome along to the industry analysis for the strategic case study of February 2020. Here we're going to be looking at the real-world coffee pod or coffee capsule industry. A relatively new industry, but it is a very interesting and dynamic one as well. Before we get into the actual industry analysis itself, I just want to address a quick question that CIMA students often raise when it comes to the industry analysis, and that is it really necessary to do a deeper industry analysis than what you're presented with in the pre-seen document? Of course, you are presented with some relevant industry information in the pre-seen document, and the question is that not sufficient? Well, first of all, let me just say right off the bat, you're not expected, of course, to be an industry expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that there are good reasons why you should do an extra bit of work on the real-world industry. Understanding the wider business environment and industrial context has, I believe, two key potential benefits on exam day. First of all, it helps you to anticipate some of the potential issues that might arise in the unseen scenario and therefore avoid any nasty surprises or confusion. Of course, the examiners are going to try and make the scenarios as realistic as possible because, of course, the whole point of the case study exam is to test your ability to apply your objective and theoretical knowledge in a realistic real-world scenario. And so for that reason, of course, the examiners are going to be looking to real-world scenarios and developments and trends in the industry in order to inspire the kinds of questions and problems that they're going to present to you on exam day. So if you have a good familiarity with the broader industry trends, then that's going to put you in a better position to anticipate some of the kinds of scenarios and problems that might arise on exam day. A second related reason is because it makes it easier for you then to illustrate and apply your abstract theoretical knowledge that you've covered in your objective studies by using concrete examples and specifics. So if you're familiar with the key concepts that are in operation in this industry, you're of course going to be better able then to give examples, concrete examples, and apply your knowledge in a way that is allowing you to illustrate that knowledge with examples and cases and things like that from the real world industry. So for those reasons, I think it is an important and useful exercise to do a deeper dive on the real world industry than what you're simply presented with in the pre-seen document. That is, of course, important information and it's supplementary information, but I think it is worthwhile to do a deeper dive on the real world industry. So with that in mind, let's get started. We're going to start here with a brief rundown of what exactly we're going to cover in this industry analysis. We're going to start with a product overview. We're going to be looking at these capsules or pods, coffee pods, in a little bit more detail, looking at the different kinds that are available. From there then in section 2, we're looking at broader numbers and trends in the coffee market, generally speaking, and specifically as well in terms of demand for pods and capsules. Then we're going to look at the primary distribution channels for coffee pods and coffee capsules. Looking then at the competitive landscape, just looking at the degree of rivalry that's in this market at the moment. And then finally, we're going to look at some real-world market players, major players in the industry, major companies in the coffee pod and coffee capsule segment. At the end, we also include some of the key sources that we have relied on in formulating this industry analysis. You can do a deeper dive on some aspects of this industry analysis if you want to in your own time, and the key sources at the end are a good place to start if that's what you want to do. Okay, let's start with section 1 then. We have the product overview. Let's start with a definition basically of what coffee pods or coffee capsules are. They are single-serve coffee containers used in coffee brewing machines for preparing only enough coffee for a single portion. So they cannot be reused, or at least they should not be reused. The idea is that these are just one-time use. You throw them away as soon as you're finished. What is the distinctive value proposition here? What exactly are they adding that other forms of coffee consumption don't offer? Well, first of all, they reduce the time needed to brew coffee. Crucially, you just pop in the capsule, press a button, and literally within a matter of seconds, you have a fully consumable, finished product coffee. They also no need to measure out portions, the inconvenience of doing all of this, boiling kettles, measuring out the portions, adding flavors, adding sugar and so on and so forth. A lot of these capsules offer an all-in-one option where you don't have to think about any of these additional ingredients. They help to keep the unused product fresher, so for storage purposes, you can simply keep them in your cupboard in a box. The capsules are sealed so that there's no compromise on the quality. They're airtight, they're not going to expire, they're not going to degenerate over time, they're not likely to be exposed to things like dampness, whereas jars of, for example, instant coffee often do have that kind of shorter lifespan, shorter shelf life, and indeed they have to be kept in specific conditions, cool, dry places and so on. You're familiar with reading those kinds of instructions on the back of your instant coffee jars. They also allow for removal and disposal after use without getting the user's hands wet or sticky. So with other machines where you actually have to put in the filter coffee yourself and you have to take out filters and dispose of them, you're likely to get coffee grinds everywhere, you're likely to get water everywhere. These coffee pods and capsules tend to be much more convenient, less messy, less likely to cause a mess in your kitchen. For that reason, all of these reasons, these are this distinctive value propositions of coffee pods and coffee capsules. Convenience, they're tidy, they don't have short shelf lives, and they don't require you to add in things like extra milk and additives and flavorings. They tend to have all of those things included. Some of the disadvantages then, there are downsides of course to the coffee pods. In terms of price, they're more expensive per unit of coffee whey to brew quality coffee at home. So with other forms like instant coffee, you can buy relatively in bulk at a lower price per unit of coffee. Easy to substitute. There are many alternatives to home brewing. As we've mentioned, instant coffee and other forms of filter coffee are still available, and they can also be produced and prepared at home. Higher prices, of course, of the coffee pods and capsules do incentivize coffee consumers to look for cheaper substitutes, and as I mentioned, there are several options available there. And waste. The capsules come with a cost to the environment. This is raised in the pre-scene document. There is this mention of the unrecyclable nature of many of these coffee pods and capsules. And indeed, there is a race on at the moment in the real world industry, as we'll see, to increasingly move towards recyclable or at least semi-recyclable alternatives to the what you might call traditional coffee pods. So capsules do come with that cost due to their unrecyclable packaging. You often have a mix, for example, in these coffee pods of elements and of materials, which makes it very difficult to recycle them. So there are three main types of coffee pods. The first one, the paper coffee pod, we'll be looking at this a little bit later on. It kind of resembles your traditional tea bag. Then we have the more familiar K-cups. These are probably the most common, most universal and recognizable coffee capsules. And finally then we have what are sometimes called tea discs. These are flatter and they tend to be made all from plastic materials, whereas the K-cups in general are a mixture of foil, tin foil and aluminium and plastic, some combination of those three materials. So the types of coffee pods, I should say, let's have a look at in a little bit more detail of the various features of these different kinds of pods. The paper pods, first of all. Coffee is packed in a paper filter. They're easily interchangeable with other systems, allows limited variety of flavors, so there's less of a flavor range in the case of paper pods. They are fully biodegradable. This is a very, very strong advantage compared to some of the other capsule and pod alternatives, and can decompose naturally, so that's strongly in their favor. However, they do have limited options in terms of flavors and varieties. K-cups then, the most common and popular form of coffee pod. Coffee is packed in a plastic or aluminium or indeed some combination of the two package. It is usually designed for use with a single brand or a single system. This is an important point and we're going to come back to this because this has been complicated over the years. It allows for a wide range of tastes and combinations and coffee styles. However, they are either not recyclable or require additional after-use processing in order to be recycled. So remember the coffee company in the pre-scene, SD, they do offer recycling, but you have to send the capsules back to the company and they have a special processing system for separating out the different materials so that they can then be reused or recycled. Tea discs then, the final style, these are the flatter, all plastic alternatives. Coffee is packed in a plastic only package. They're compatible only with proprietary coffee systems. Again, we're going to come back to this issue a little later. allows to brew a variety of hot drinks, so they do have that variety: coffee, cappuccino, espresso, tea, hot chocolate, etc. They do, again, require often additional after-use processing in order to be recycled. So from an environmental point of view, the paper pods are still out ahead of these two alternatives. But in terms of things like convenience of preparation and range of flavours available, the K-Cups and tea discs are still more popular. Okay, let's look at some of the broader trends in terms of figures and numbers from recent years. Starting with some of the key market drivers here, we have convenience and simplicity of use, as we mentioned, desire to recreate the cafe-style experience at home. So if you can get closer to that authentic barista coffee, which tends to be, of course, the most expensive form. Increasing interest in specialty coffee. This is certainly a developing trend, especially amongst the younger generations. They have an interest in coffee that is more focused on quality, source, and so on, these kinds of deep knowledge of the background of the coffee. Key players in the coffee market to introduce coffee pods that are compatible with popular machines. So we're going to come back to this issue, as I said, later on. There is a lot of change happening in this respect. About 60 billion coffee capsules are produced annually at present, 6.28% estimated year-over-year growth rate for 2019. The outlook is for accelerated growth at a compound annual growth rate of over 7% between 2019 and 2024. The market is expected to reach 23.6 billion by 2024. And 54% of that growth will come from the Europe, Middle East and African region. So perhaps surprisingly, this is the high growth region, Europe. It is the major market for coffee capsules. So here we have a nice color-coded map of growth rates per region. However, in the future, Asia Pacific is going to be the fastest growing market, even though Europe is currently the largest market in absolute terms. So as I said, Europe does have the highest market share as of 2018. European coffee pods market is dominated by Switzerland, followed by Germany, the United Kingdom and Italy. A growing number of coffee bars, small roasters, small local brands and baristas drive the European market for coffee overall. The number of private label players entering the market is expected to increase in the next 5 or 6 years. The United States coffee pods market actually is quite mature and has been since 2017. 27% of US coffee drinkers use a single cup brewer of some kind, that is a coffee pod or capsule. US retail sales share of single cup coffee reached 36.5% in 2018. Total sales of single cup coffee brands amounted to about $4.23 billion US dollars in 2018. So a mature market, but the growth rates there are quite low, relatively speaking. There are very attractive growth prospects in relatively new regions, and one of those regions is Australasia, Asia Pacific region. There is an increase in popularity for coffee pods and coffee capsules in this region. Countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, and this again is due to primarily the relative ease of use, premium coffee flavors that are available with coffee pods and coffee capsules, good marketing by the key players, the big brands here. This has been crucial to the market development in this region, and a wide variety of flavors as well. However, companies are facing various challenges within this industry. There are opportunities, of course, but there are several threats as well. Amongst the opportunities, we have consumers embracing a more mobile lifestyle, requiring simpler and more convenient coffee consumption. Commutes to work and so on are really encouraging people to look for convenience, especially in their morning routines. As tastes evolve as well, more consumers are looking for high quality coffee experiences, and spending on coffee is set to outpace consumption. In other words, people are more and more willing to spend more in order to get those kinds of quality coffee experiences in the domestic setting. All of these constitute opportunities, of course, for the coffee capsule and coffee pod manufacturers. There is high price tolerance, it seems, in this segment as consumers look to reproduce the kind of authentic barista experience as much as possible in the domestic context. And so that gives the advantage to these coffee capsule and coffee pod manufacturers, because of course it is the most expensive per unit of coffee way of consuming coffee in the domestic setting. And so they have the advantage of all of the varieties of coffee flavors, the convenience, ease of use, and also they have the high quality of the coffee as well. It's not compromised, it has a long shelf life. All of these put them in a strong position to take advantage of these opportunities. However, there are threats, of course. Coffee pods being not recyclable undermines the environmental drive to reduce waste, which is becoming more and more common. New competitors are entering all the time, entering this market with more eco-friendly value propositions. So for the incumbents who are a little bit slow to respond to these environmental demands, new competitors do constitute a significant threat. Millennials and Generation Z drink less coffee than older generations. That might surprise you to hear, but they do have a higher expectations and demands in terms of quality. Preferences in that generation are shifting towards gourmet coffee and indeed barista prepared coffee. So in that respect, they're going to have to up their game in order to secure those younger generations in the future. There are also expectations for bullish coffee prices in the coming years. We're going to come back to this a little bit later on. But prices are expected to rise for coffee in coming years, and that's of course going to be a threat to all forms of coffee production and manufacturing, and is going to be a problem potentially for these coffee pod and coffee capsule manufacturers, especially in a context where it becomes more competitive. Many analysts are also anticipating something of a slowdown in the global economy in the coming years, expecting, especially in places like China and India, their fast, really rapid growth rates in recent years are going to start tapering off as those markets mature. And of course, if you're going to have a slowdown in the global economy, you can expect that consumers are going to reduce their spending, especially on discretionary purchases. Things like coffee could fall into that category as well, so that needs to be borne in mind. The coffee capsule industry is dominated by three major companies. Coffee and capsules market is largely dominated by Nestle, Keurig Dr Pepper and Jacobs Douwe Egberts, with a strong global presence for each of those brands. There are some other key players like Kraft Foods, Dunkin' Brands and Starbucks Corporation. They also held a prominent share in 2018. So if you look on the right here, in terms of market concentration, consolidated versus fragmented, the coffee pods and capsules market is way up there towards the consolidated end of the spectrum. Okay, let's focus for a few moments here on distribution channels. Supermarkets are among the most important distribution channels for coffee pods and capsule manufacturers. They account for the largest market share at over 30%. After that, then we have independent retailers. They provide excellent shopping experiences. They tend to be more attentive than the large supermarket chains. Then we've specialty brand stores. These are the own brand stores of a particular coffee pod and capsule manufacturers and companies. You might think, for example, of the Nespresso stores that you see in prominent locations in urban areas. And the advantage here is they offer a much wider variety of types and flavour combinations, and they tend to have all of the latest and most innovative flavour types and combinations in those stores. On trade then, this is for example restaurants and hotels. There have been gains in orders and volume in the coffee pods and capsules. However, this is still a growing market. It's quite a low percentage of the total in terms of distribution channels. And the reason is, of course, because the restaurants, cafes and hotels, for example, tend to have their own baristas, their own specialists in the production and preparation of coffee. And of course, people tend to expect the highest quality when it comes to on-trade coffee. But with the increasing quality of coffee pods and capsules, the convenience and the speed of preparation, there are some reasons why certain restaurants, hotels and cafes might consider having this option, even if it is just alongside some of the other on-trade options that are already there. Online retail then is becoming increasingly important, and indeed for some companies it is the most important distribution channel. The number of online orders placed for coffee capsules overall grew by 53% in 2018. The online retailing segment had a value share approaching 27% of the coffee pods market in 2018. Nespresso and K-Cup by Keurig lead in online sales of coffee capsules in the United States, and Nestle accounted for 5% of its sales through online retail channels, and it's growing all the time. As you saw there up at the top, the number of online orders placed for coffee capsules grew by a whopping 53% in 2018, and it looks set to continue growing into 2019 and 2020 as well.